that they have raised. I'm going to go on to mention a number of those issues later in my speech, but one of the issues which has been raised consistently by members is about the backstop. We have an opportunity to give a clear message to the European Union on this matter today. And I will also say to my right honourable and learned friend that I'm sure he has thought through very carefully the longer-term implications of the sort of move, the moves that are being proposed tonight in these, the amendments that he and the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Normanton, have put forward, and the implications they have for the relationship between the Executive and Parliament in the future. I'd like to come on to the Right Honourable Ladies. I'd like to come. I will give way once more and then to the.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister also get the idea that the European Union too want to do a deal with the United Kingdom, that we have a £95 billion deficit with them, that the Germans sell us 850,000 cars every year, we buy 20% of all the Prosecco produced in Italy? Does she agree with me that the European Union wish to carry on trading with the United Kingdom in the way that they currently do?
To my right honourable friend, and I'm going to reference this later on, I think there is a willingness on the other side in terms of the European Union to agree a deal with the United Kingdom, but what they clearly said when the meaningful vote was lost, they wanted to know what it was the UK wanted to see happening in relation to the deal. That's an opportunity that we have today. I will give way to the Honourable Lady and then I'll make some progress.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister to allow me to intervene at this early stage. The Prime Minister is trying to encourage this House to vote for an amendment which uses the words alternative arrangements to avoid a hard border on the island of Ireland. Forgive me, Prime Minister, if I say that those words are nebulous. They are nebulous. The Prime Minister has a duty to spell out to this House before we vote what those arrangements, alternative arrangements are, and how on earth the other 27 EU member states are expected to agree to this revised arrangement before Brexit date on the 29th of March.
To the Honourable Lady, obviously the amendment is standing in the name of my honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, and other honourable and right honourable members, does indeed reference the issue of alternative arrangements. That term is actually one which is recognised in the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration in terms of and if she will forgive me, I'm going on to reference a number of ways in which a number of options that have been brought forward in relation to that particular term. But no, I'm going to make some progress. I'm going to make some progress. As in the case of the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Normanton, Pontefract Castleford, her amendment does not rule out no deal. It simply delays the point of decision. And the policy dilemmas, the choices, the trade-offs that we face as a Parliament will not go away if we postpone exit day. Her amendment offers absolutely no positive suggestions to address them. Furthermore, I believe that the EU are very unlikely to agree to extend Article 50 without a credible plan for how we're going to approve a deal. So whatever the Right Honourable Lady's intention, I think the practical consequences of her amendment would not be to rule out no deal, but to delay Brexit. And that's not a course of action that this House should support. I will, of course, give way to the Right Honourable Lady.
If the Prime Minister does not get agreement, either from the EU or from this Parliament, to her next course of action, is she ruling out any extension of Article 50?
I have been very clear, and I've said earlier, the process that we will follow. If we don't get it, if we get a deal and we bring it back to this House, or if we haven't got a deal, we'll give this House opportunities through amendable motions to state their view as to what should happen at that point in time. I will give way to my honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. Would she agree with me that throughout the history of the European Union, they have always worked to deadlines, and the British people now want us to get on and finish the job they have given us?
Can I thank my honourable friend for what he's pointed out, and particularly for the fact that, as he said, I think the British people actually just want to see this done. They want us to leave. They want us to leave with a deal. I am going to make... I will give way to the Right Honourable Lady, as I've referenced her.
I think it is really important that the House has some clarity on this. If she is saying that there will be future votes in which Parliament can make some decisions about no deal or not, she will know that the credibility that she has is very limited, because she said there would be a vote in December and then pulled it at the last minute. So therefore we do need some clarity from her now. Is she saying that if Parliament votes for an extension of Article 50 to avoid no deal on March the 29th, she would respect it?
Yeah. To the Right Honourable Lady, there is a very simple point. Extending Article 50 does not rule out no deal. No, this is... I'm sorry. This is, as I've said before, but I apologise to the House, I'm going to repeat again. There are two ways in which it is possible to rule out no deal. One is by revoking Article 50 and not leaving. That's the SNP's view, but it's not the view I believe. It's not my view, it's not the government's view, it's not the view of the British people, and I believe it's not the view of the majority of members of this House. The other way to ensure we don't leave with no deal is to agree a deal. Now, the stage we're at the moment is that the House of Commons has rejected the deal that the government agreed with the European Union when we brought that back. It rejected it having achieved further reassurances. I'm going to go on to say what I believe is now required by this House and from the conversations and discussions that I've had with members and right honourable members of this House. And as I have set out, and the Right Honourable Lady wants to intervene again, I will take her intervention again, and then, if she will excuse me, I will make some progress.
I am very grateful for the Prime Minister in giving way again, but I'm simply trying to understand what she is saying, because she can't have it both ways. She can't be saying that she absolutely will leave on March the 29th in all circumstances, whatever happens, and then simultaneously say there will be an opportunity for Parliament to have some future votes and decide what happens next if there is no deal. The question here is whether or not she would ever contemplate any extension of Article 50 to get a bit more time to sort things out to avoid no deal. Yes or no?
As I said earlier in my speech, we will bring a revised deal back to this House for a second meaningful vote as soon as we possibly can. If it was not supported by the House, then we would table an amendable motion for debate the next day. And if we've not brought a revised deal back to this House by Wednesday the 13th of February, we will make a statement and again table an amendable motion for debate the next day. And the Right Honourable Lady references the timetable up to the 29th of March. Actually, this House voted for that timetable when it voted to trigger Article 50. Now, I'd like to move on to the amendment in the name of the Leader of the Opposition, because I'm going to make some progress. Mr. Speaker, we should not indulge the amendment from the Leader of the Opposition. First, he wanted a comprehensive customs union, then it was a new customs union, now it's a permanent customs union. Now, last week, I asked him whether he means accepting the common external tariff, accepting the common commercial policy, accepting the Union Customs Code, or accepting EU state aid rules. He had no answers then. He has no answers now. He hasn't got a clue. He's still facing both ways. He's still facing both ways on whether Labour would keep freedom of movement. And last night, he whipped his MPs to oppose the bill that would end free movement and introduce a skills-based system. And he's still facing both ways on a second referendum. His amendment calls for legislation for a public vote, but we still don't know whether he would use it or what the question would be. And I know that many Labour voters and MPs and others in the Labour movement are frustrated by the Leader of the Opposition's approach. It's surely time for him to step up to the responsibility of being Leader of the Opposition. And finally sit down with me and talk about how we can secure support in this House for a deal. As I said last week, he's been willing to sit down with Hamas, Hezbollah and the IRA without preconditions. It's time he did something in our national interest, not against it. Mr. Speaker, none of the amendments I've addressed so far will ensure that we deliver Brexit. Instead, they simply provide more arguments against action and more reasons to stand still. Rather than setting out a plan to make Brexit work, they create further delay. And delay without a plan is not a solution, it's a road to nowhere. But I'm not prepared. No, I have said to the Honourable Lady that I'm going to make progress. I am not prepared to stand still and put at risk either the Brexit the people of this country voted for or the economic success the people of this country have worked so hard to secure. And after this House gave its verdict on the withdrawal agreement, I stood at this dispatch box and pledged to work with the House to determine what steps to take next. And in the 2 weeks since I have done just that. I've listened. Oh, well, the Labour Party front bench says, no, I haven't done that. Actually, the only people I haven't been able to talk to about this is the Labour Party front bench because they decide not to come. So I've listened to the House, I've met with MPs from all parties, spoken with and listened to MEPs, heads of the devolved administrations, senior trade unionists and the leaders of Britain's biggest businesses. And from those conversations, it's obvious that 3 key changes are needed. First, we must be more flexible, open and inclusive in how we engage this House in our approach to negotiating our future partnership with the European Union. Second, we must and will embed the strongest possible protections on workers' rights and the environment. And the Government will not allow the UK leaving the EU to result in any lowering of standards in relation to employment, environmental protection or health and safety. And furthermore, we will ensure that after exit day, the House has the opportunity to consider any measure approved by EU institutions that strengthens any of these protections. As I've set out before, we will consider legislation where necessary to ensure these commitments are binding. And to this end, we're having further talks with the trade unions and MPs across the House in the coming days to flesh out exactly how we can ensure that their concerns on these fronts are met. And so my message to Britain's workers in factories, offices, warehouses and right across our country is that you can rest assured that the Government will deliver for you. I give way to the honourable gentleman.
I thank the Prime Minister for giving way. There is a need to give a clear and concise message to the EU and to our nation. The Prime Minister doesn't want a no-deal. The businesses in Slough and in the rest of the country do not want a no-deal. The unions, which she just mentioned, do not want a no-deal. So what is the problem in putting that down in black and white?
Prime Minister.
In order to deliver what the honourable gentleman wants and ensure we don't leave with no deal, we need to agree a deal. What we are doing today is looking at a series of amendments, and I'm coming on shortly to an amendment that actually sets out a clear view from this House that we can take to the European Union and work to ensure that we can leave with a deal. And this is the third point that has become clear from these discussions. We must address the concerns of this House over the nature of the Northern Ireland backstop. The fundamental concern is that what is supposed to be a temporary arrangement could in fact become permanent, and the message has been unequivocal that this House wants changes to the backstop before it will back a deal. This message, no, I'm going to explain this position that people have put forward. That message has come from Conservative backbenchers, from opposition members and from our confidence and supply partners in the DUP. That is why I believe it is in all our interests for the House to back the amendment tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West, and the member for South West Wiltshire, and my right honourable friend, the member for Ashford and others. This amendment, I'm going to explain this. This amendment will give the mandate I need to negotiate with Brussels an arrangement that commands a majority in this House. One that ensures we leave with a deal and addresses the House's concerns while guaranteeing no return to the hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. What I'm talking about is not a further exchange of letters, but a significant and legally binding change to the withdrawal agreement. Negotiating such a change will not be easy. It will involve reopening the withdrawal agreement, a move for which I know there is limited appetite among our European partners. But I believe that with a mandate from this House and supported by the Attorney-General, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster and the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union, I can secure such a change in advance of our departure from the EU. So I give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for giving way, and can I welcome what she has said about the need to address the issue of the Northern Ireland backstop. She's quite right to emphasise that as the primary problem, and I welcome the fact that she has said in terms that she will go back and seek the reopening of the withdrawal agreement, and she can be assured of our support in trying to find a solution which avoids any hard border on the island of Ireland, but also avoids any borders within the United Kingdom.
The right honourable gentleman, I'm grateful for the clarity with which he's just set out that position. We remain absolutely committed as a government to ensuring we have no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and also ensuring that any proposals that do get accepted by this House and put forward are ones that maintain our precious union. I'm going to... I'll give way.
I thank the Prime Minister very much indeed for giving way. I agree with her that the best way to avoid a no deal is to put an agreement in place. And she'll be aware that on these benches some very surprising members with very different Brexit views have been coming together to come up with some proposals. We're very grateful for the time that she's engaged with us.
Nice to have been told
Will
that.
she undertake to ask her officials now to take forward these proposals, to consider them seriously and to put them on the table as a way perhaps of fleshing out these alternative arrangements that she is talking about?
Prime Minister.
In fact, my right honourable friend actually anticipated what I was going to go on to speak about in her question. If I can just say this, first of all, that what we'll be focusing on is delivering specific changes that will address the concerns of the House. And I'm looking at a range of ways to achieve this. And as my right honourable friend has just referenced, she and my honourable friends, the members for Wickham, North West Hampshire and North East Somerset and others have worked to bring forward a serious proposal that we're engaging with sincerely and positively. And I give just a moment. I will take some more interventions, but just a moment. And I can give my honourable friend the confirmation that we will sit down and work through, in the way that she has suggested, the proposal that has come forward. I give way to the honourable lady.
17.4 million people voted for Brexit. The idea that they were duped into doing so is absolute nonsense. So Brexit must be delivered. But it must be a Brexit that protects jobs in my constituency and beyond. And unions and bosses tell me that that requires a permanent customs union or arrangement. Why won't she listen on that?
Minister.
Can I say to the honourable lady, she's absolutely right about ensuring that we deliver on the vote of those 17.4 million people, and I want to deliver on that with a deal that does protect jobs. And what we need to ensure is that as we look to the future relationship, we have the, in that free trade area and in the customs arrangements we have, that we remember the necessity of ensuring that we protect those jobs. What I've also heard very clearly from honourable members on all sides of this House, and of course from the trade union leaders that I've spoken to, is this issue about ensuring that we protect workers' rights, and as I've just indicated, we are committed to doing so. Can I say, can I say to all members of this House, I have already been very generous in taking interventions. I am sure there are many members of this House who wish to contribute to this debate, and so I will make progress. Can I say to my honourable friend, the member for North East Somerset, as I have just referenced him in my speech, I will give way to him.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, and may I thank her for her very clear assurances that the withdrawal agreement text will be reopened, that she will be considering what has been called the Malthouse Compromise. And may I ask for one more promise that any further detailed agreement will come back and will not be deemed to have been ratified by the amendment by my right honourable friend, the member for Altrincham and Sale West.
Can I give my assurance? It does have to come back. It will come back to this House. It has to come back to this House. And legally, ratification of the agreement can only actually take place. It is the act of passing the WAB, the bill, that will be the ratification moment for any arrangements. I will take one more intervention from the honourable lady.
For giving way. She's repeatedly referred to protecting workers' rights post-Brexit. Can I take her back to 2017 and my bill that was specifically about protecting workers' rights when we leave the European Union on the 29th of March. Can I ask her why it wasn't adopted then, and if she's so committed to it, will she meet with me to discuss the elements of that bill that she's prepared to adopt going forward?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, we are looking at ways in which we can give that assurance in relation to workers' rights, and as I said, we are looking at where legislation would be appropriate, where legislation would be necessary. I'm happy to meet with her and go through that issue. Can I say, if I may, I've taken a lot more intervention. I wanted just to reference also, to complete what I was saying to my right honourable friend, the member for Loughborough, that we will indeed engage seriously and positively with the proposals that she has put forward, which were also referenced by my honourable friend, the member for North East Somerset. The amendment that the concept that we see within that, crucially, is this concept of alternative arrangements, which has, as I've already said in this speech, has already been accepted by the EU as a way out of the backstop, and so I commend I commend my honourable friends and right honourable friends for their willingness to find a solution, and I look forward to working with them over the coming days. But a number of other colleagues have also suggested ways to achieve this aim, such as securing a time limit to the backstop or a unilateral exit clause, which of course we will study closely as well. While there are obviously details that need to be worked through, the fact that leading figures from different sides of the argument are coming together to develop proposals shows how much progress has been made over the past few weeks. I will give way to the Leader of the Green Party.
I'm very grateful for giving way, but does she recognise that there is no solution in chasing in fantasies? Yeah. The EU has ruled this kind of option out many times, and you cannot have an insurance policy that is based on a technology that doesn't exist. Will she not recognise that what she is chasing here are heated-up fantasies that have already been rejected by the EU, and they depend on technologies that don't exist?
Yeah. Can I say to the Honourable Lady, there are members across this House who have put forward a number of proposals as to how this issue can be addressed. They are not indulging in fantasies. They are coming forward with serious proposals which this government will work with them on. The essence of...
Most grateful. As to the question of our control over our laws and to honour the referendum, will my right honourable friend give instructions to make certain that in any future withdrawal implementation bill there will be an express repeal of the 1972 Act so as to dovetail with Section 1 of the Withdrawal Act 2018 we've already passed?
Minister.
Can I say to my honourable friend that, obviously, as he knows, in the EU Withdrawal Act we repealed the 72 European Communities Act. For the purposes of the implementation period, it would be necessary to replicate the impact of some of those aspects of that Act, but I will certainly take what my honourable friend has said, and within the WAB, within the withdrawal agreement bill that we will need to bring forward to this House, we will make absolutely clear the arrangements for ensuring that the European Communities Act and the impact of it does not go further beyond the end of that implementation period. If honourable members will just excuse me for a minute, I will take some more interventions. I will take some more interventions in the future. I will take some more interventions in a little while. But if I can just make the point that the essence of any negotiation is to find a mutually acceptable solution, and that's the spirit in which both sides have consistently approached these negotiations, and that is the spirit in which I will engage with our partners if this amendment passes. And some say that there's no point, I think I'm hearing that from some of the interventions from a sedentary position and elsewhere. Some say there's no point even trying to achieve any change and that the EU simply won't budge under any circumstances. But in the 2 years since this House voted to trigger Article 50, the EU has made concessions in many areas of the negotiations where people said no ground would ever be given. And today, neither side in this negotiation wants to see the UK leave without a deal. The simple fact is that the deal I reached with the EU has been rejected by this House. In response, the EU has asked us what we do want, what this Parliament will accept, and this is Parliament's opportunity to tell them. I give way to the Honourable Member.
The Prime Minister agreed that rather than chasing a fantasy, there is now actually an opportunity, and an opportunity which has been presented by Michel Barnier himself when he told the Irish Government that the EU would look for ways of ensuring that checks and balances or checks could take place without any infrastructure along the border, and even talked about paperless and decentralised arrangements. That's what the EU are saying. So obviously it's not a fantasy, it's something which we have in common.
And,
Prime Minister.
And these are issues exactly which we want to work on, and a number of proposals that have been put forward. But what matters today is that Parliament makes it clear to the European Union that this issue of the backstop is the one that needs to be dealt with. This is Parliament's opportunity to respond to the European Union, who have said that they want us to tell us what we want, and this is our opportunity to tell them. This is not the second meaningful vote. As I've said and repeated, we will bring a revised deal back to this House for just such a vote as soon as possible. But a vote for this amendment is a vote to tell Brussels that the current nature of the backstop is the key reason the House cannot support this deal, just as many honourable members have said to me, to the media and to their constituents over the past few weeks. A vote against this amendment does the opposite. It tells the EU that despite what people may have said in speeches, tweets and newspaper columns, the backstop is not the problem. And it risks sending a message that we are not serious about delivering a Brexit that works for Britain. I'll give way to the honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful to her for giving way. She's not the first Prime Minister to discover that the Conservative Party is utterly ununitable and unleadable on Europe. Many other Prime Ministers have learnt that lesson. But as she celebrates the fact that she has people on different sides of the argument coming together in support of an amendment, doesn't she realise it's because the amendment is so nebulous as to be meaningless that she's been able to get them to agree to it?
Prime Minister.
Gentlemen, I think if he wants to look for different views around this issue, he can perhaps talk to some of his honourable colleagues, as we've been hearing from the... And he might actually try to get the Leader of the Opposition to focus on a detailed proposal for what the Labour Party thinks for the future. No, I'm not going to take... I'm going... I promised my honourable friend I would give way to him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think on this side of the House we're all looking to try and find a way to get a deal. And I've been very impressed with what the Prime Minister said today. But can she assure the House that we will send the Prime Minister back to Brussels to reopen a withdrawal agreement? But if she comes back and we don't agree with it, we will still have the right to vote against it.
Prime Minister.
Yes, of course. This House will have the right to decide whether or not it agrees the agreement that's come forward. But can I say I hope my honourable friend, when we do, as I'm sure that we will be able to, bring a revised agreement back to this House, I hope my honourable friend will look at that carefully before he determines where his vote should go. No, I'm conscious the length of time I've been at the dispatch box. Honourable members want to speak. I'm now going to conclude. Mr. Speaker, since the draft withdrawal agreement was published, I've come to the House to discuss it more than half a dozen times. I've been on the front bench for many hours of debate, taking hundreds of questions and interventions from honourable and right honourable members, and I've been listening. I've witnessed division and discord. Can I say to my honourable friend, I had indicated I wasn't going to be taking any more interventions, and I'm just completing my speech. But I'm sure she'll have an opportunity, if she catches the Speaker's eye, to speak later. I've witnessed division and discord, and I've seen passion and anger on all sides. But in the 2 weeks since the House rejected the withdrawal agreement, I've sensed a growing recognition of the task that has been entrusted to us. Members on all sides have begun to focus on what really matters, on delivering the Brexit that Britain voted for while protecting our economy and our people. We can increasingly see where this consensus lies, and I believe that we are within reach of a deal that this House can stand behind. But the days ahead are crucial. When I go back to Brussels to seek the changes this House demands, I need the strongest possible support behind me. Most of the amendments before us do not provide that. They create a cacophony of voices when this House needs to speak as one. I will never stop battling for Britain, but the odds of success become far longer if this House ties one hand behind my back. So I call on the House to give me the mandate I need to deliver a deal this House can support. Do that, and I can work to reopen the withdrawal agreement. Do that, and I can fight for a backstop that honours our commitments to the people of Northern Ireland in a way this House can support. Do that, and we can leave the EU with a deal that honours the result of the referendum. So the time has come for words to be matched by deeds. If you want to tell Brussels what this House will accept, you have to vote for it. If you want to leave with a deal, you have to vote for it. If you want Brexit, you have to vote for Brexit.
The question is as on the order paper. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to speak in this debate. And it's important to start by reminding us all that this whole process was only secured in the teeth of opposition from the government. So I start by paying tribute to those MPs who voted with us for Parliament to have a full democratic role in the Brexit process, and especially, therefore, to the member for Beaconsfield for the work that he did in the earlier debates. Labour has been absolutely clear from the start. Absolutely clear from the start, Mr. Speaker, there must be a meaningful vote on any negotiated deal. That was raised by my friend, the member for Holborn and St Pancras, at the very beginning of this whole Brexit process. And that should a deal be defeated in Parliament, as it was decisively, then Parliament must have a say on how the government proceeds. This is a vital issue that affects the future direction of our country and the futures facing all of our constituents. It determines the jobs and living standards of our people, the rights of European Union citizens living in Britain who have been deeply stressed by this situation, as have British citizens living across the continent of Europe. Our place in the world and our participation and cooperation in European-wide projects on issues as vital as security, counter-terrorism and climate change. Our job, Mr. Speaker, must be to bring people together. No matter how anyone in this House campaigned in the referendum, Mr. Speaker, no matter how anyone campaigned in the referendum, we cannot wish away the votes of 17 million people who voted to leave any more than we can ignore the concerns of 16 million who voted to remain. We must have in our minds the views right across the country. It is, Mr. Speaker, therefore right that members of this House represent their constituents to decide the way forward in implementing the results of the referendum. But in delivering the result, we have to unite. We have to unite people, not to create further divisions or to stoke xenophobia or to allow racism to rear its ugly head within our society. Mr. Speaker, many communities across this country have been neglected for far too long, lacking decent investment with too few.
Order. The person who has the floor chooses whether, and if so when, to give way. That's the situation. It's very clear, and it cannot be contradicted. That's all there is to it. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, what I was saying was, I will give way later on to a small number of people because I want this. Listen, the reasons this debate is so short is because the government decided to take an hour out of it to make a statement that could have been made on any other day. Not to mention the delay in the vote on December the 11th, which has run down the clock still further. Mr. Speaker, what I was saying was many communities across this country have been neglected for far too long, lacking decent investment, too few secure and well-paid jobs, too little new industrial development. These, Mr. Speaker, are not issues that face Britain alone, but they would be recognisable in communities all across Europe where many people face exactly the same problems. And so,
I'm very grateful. Contradictory, confused or claptrap? Which of those C's best suits the description of the right honourable gentleman's policy at the current time?
Mr. Speaker, this is a serious debate, and I don't think the honourable member's intervention has done anything to raise the standard of debate. Mr. Speaker, it's quite clear to me that the first duty we have is to block a disastrous no deal. And I hope that amendments to that effect will indeed be carried by the House later this evening. Labour's amendment, which stands in my name and those of my colleagues, starts, Mr. Speaker, by calling for sufficient time for Parliament to vote on options that prevent leaving with no deal. But whatever happens in the votes that follow, it has now become inevitable that the government will have to extend Article 50 in any scenario. If amendments intended to rule out no deal are defeated, and if this government is serious about keeping the threat of no deal on the table, then it's not even close to being prepared, and the exit date would have to be extended. And even if the Prime Minister's deal were to somehow achieve a majority in this House next month, there is no chance that the necessary legislation, primary legislation, and an extensive category of secondary legislation, I believe there are over 600 statutory instruments, could clear this place between now and the 29th of March.
Mr. Speaker, I can see that I'm very, very well liked here. Would my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, agree that clear, close and collaborative, that is the relationship which his amendment is proposing, and that is why we need a customs union, which is exactly what the unions, which Labour members and others are telling us, that we need a customs union with our neighbours.
I thank my friend for that intervention, and of course he's right. If we're to protect jobs and industries, maintain living standards, then of course there has to be a customs union. But as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, there are...
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He's just reiterated, as his motion references, the need for a customs union. Will he now tell this House whether he means accepting the common commercial policy, accepting the common external tariff, accepting the union customs code? It's no use asking the Shadow Secretary of State, and accepting the EU state aid rules.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, a customs union would be negotiated, would be inclusive, and would be designed to ensure that our jobs are protected, our investment is protected, and there is frictionless and seamless trade between the European Union, and we would have a say in future trade arrangements, something the Prime Minister has absolutely failed to achieve. The fault, Mr. Speaker, for not achieving it lies absolutely with the Prime Minister. She claimed she would have a deal agreed by October, then delayed that by 1 month, and still suffered the worst...
Order. The former Foreign Secretary doesn't seem to be very well versed in the traditions of the House of Commons and debate... Order! I'm telling the right honourable gentleman what the position is, and he will learn from me. When he seeks to intervene, he waits to hear whether the person on his or her feet is giving way. The Leader of the Opposition is not giving way, in which case, with the very greatest of respect, it's for the right honourable gentleman to know his place, which is in his seat. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fault lies exclusively with the Prime Minister, who missed her own deadline to have a deal agreed by October. And she still suffered the worst defeat of any government in British history.
Can I thank my right honourable friend? Listen, I'm not sure how people in this House believe this will be received by the public watching TV. But I've got to say, the public are sick of the childish antics of people in this House. They want us to come together and find a way through this mess. Now, there are thousands of different views and variations of what people felt and thought they voted for in that referendum. But the one thing that we can be certain of is that the referendum leaflet that went to every household in this country didn't make a single mention of leaving the customs union. Why can't we find agreement on that?
I thank my friend for his intervention, and I think the point he makes about the way in which this House debates these matters is actually important. He's somebody that led a local authority, Oldham, brought people together, brought communities together and achieved things, something this government has lamentably failed to do. And if the Prime...
Order! Point of order, Mr. Michael Fabricant.
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman opposite may have inadvertently misled the House. He claimed that no one had said during the EU referendum that we would be leaving the customs union. In fact, the former Prime Minister said that...
Order! Resume your seat, Mr. Fabricant. I know you're trying to help the House, and I appreciate that. Your public spiritedness is well known throughout the House and across the nation. The honourable gentleman referred to a leaflet, the contents thereof. Whatever the merits or demerits of that argument, it is not a matter of order for the Chair. It's a matter of political debate, as the grinning countenance of the honourable gentleman suggests he himself is well aware. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just ask, is the Prime Minister's...
Order. I hope it's a genuine point of order. Point of order, Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's actually an observation, really, but it does seem...
Order! Resume your seat. Resume at your seat. No. Order! With no disrespect to... Order! With no disrespect to the... With no disrespect to the honourable lady, I'm not interested in observations. Order! I'm not debating it. I'm telling her what the situation... No, it's no good laughing, chuckling away as though it's a matter of great amusement. It's a matter of fact. Points of order, yes. Observations, no. No, the honourable lady has helpfully explained that she had an observation to make. We're very grateful. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A point of order. The honourable gentleman does know parliamentary procedure. Point of order, Mr. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Speaker, this is a genuine point of order. I wonder if you could guide the House in how members refuse interventions, because I think the reason there is so much noise is it's not clear whether the right honourable gentleman has heard the intervention or not. And your guidance, I think, would be extraordinarily helpful.
Order. I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. If I understand his point of order correctly, the answer to it is that the customary method of acknowledging the intention of another member to intervene and perhaps the acceptance of that intervention is a gesticulation with the hand, at which, amongst other things, the honourable gentleman excels. No. I think the honourable lady is a bit confused. It's not the fact that somebody seeking to intervene gesticulates. It is the fact that the member on his or her feet signals acceptance. That hasn't happened, and therefore the Leader of the Opposition has the floor. The position is extraordinarily straightforward. Point of order. Point of order, Angela Smith.
Mr. Speaker, I do wonder, with all the noise in the chamber, whether or not being directly behind the Leader of the Opposition, my request for an intervention may not have been heard.
Well, I can't claim to have known that, but I think now the honourable lady has issued what might be called a public information notice, and we're aware of it, but it is a matter for the Leader of the Opposition to decide. I hope the honourable lady is satisfied with her efforts. Jeremy Corbyn. Further to the point of order, order, calm down. I gave a ruling in relation to the point of order. Further to that point of order doesn't arise. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister seriously telling this House that we have to wait until the 13th of February and put her faith and put... Mr. Speaker, I can well understand what the Tory MPs are trying to do here. They don't want to hear the debate. They don't want to be part of this debate. They merely don't...
Order. Many people have talked in recent times about the importance of respect in the chamber. No, I don't require any help from the Government Chief Whip. Let me very gently say to the Government Chief Whip, he has a challenging task which he discharges to the best of his capabilities, and the House and the nation are grateful to him. The idea that he needs to advise the Leader of the Opposition or the Speaker on how to discharge their responsibilities is frankly beyond credulity. He's got one job to do. People will make their assessment of whether and how well he does it. Don't try doing somebody else's job. With respect, sir, it's way beyond you. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker,
Dean Dorries.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is it in accordance with the rules of this House that the Leader of the Opposition only takes interventions from male members of his party?
The answer is there's no breach of rules whatsoever. The honourable lady's made her own point in her own way, and I acknowledge it. No breach of rules has taken place. Order has been maintained. That's clear to me, and it's clear to the professional advisers to the chair as well. And I think the honourable lady knows it, but she's made her own point in her own inimitable way. Jeremy Corbyn.
I did take an intervention from the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the member hadn't noticed that. Is the Prime Minister seriously telling the House to wait until February the 13th and put their faith in her doing negotiations in a couple of weeks that she's failed to do over the past 2 years? And one really wonders how many more ceremonial baubles, promises of ermine, will be handed out in vain in an attempt to cajole Conservative MPs to vote for a deal that has been overwhelmingly rejected by this House. The Prime Minister says a second referendum would be like asking the public to vote again until they give the right answer. But so far, that is precisely what she's asking this House to do. Mr. Speaker, Labour will today back amendments that attempt to rule out this government's reckless option of allowing the UK to crash out without a deal. Everyone bar the Prime Minister accepts that this would be disastrous. The CBI says that, and I quote, the projected impact of no deal on the UK economy would be devastating. Just yesterday, the Federation of Small Businesses called on members of this House to block no deal. And the TUC, representing millions of workers, is opposed to no deal, as its General Secretary, Francis O'Grady, discussed with me last week. Every opposition party in this House is opposed to no deal. Many members opposite, even frontbench and cabinet members opposite, are opposed to no deal. Let me quote the Chancellor, who said recently, "I clearly do not believe that making a choice to leave without a deal would be a responsible thing to do. So presumably he too wants no deal ruled out." Mr. Speaker, I'm making progress. Mr. Speaker, I'm making progress. Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary. Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary has gone further and called for a free vote on the amendment tabled by my right honourable friend, the member for Normanton, Pontefract and Castleford. The Labour Party will back that amendment tonight because to crash out without a deal would be deeply damaging for industry and economy. That's why the Chancellor says it would be irresponsible. I say to my right honourable friend now that in backing her amendment, we are backing a short window of 3 months to allow time for renegotiation.
Is my honourable friend giving way or not? Will my honourable friend give way?
Mr. Speaker, I do want to address the point that my right honourable friend has raised about my amendment, and I don't want to cut across what I know is a very difficult wider issue here. So just on this point about the amendment, can I reassure my right honourable friend that the purpose of the amendment and the bill is not to fix any particular time for any extension or even to decide now what an extension of Article 50 should be. It is actually simply to give the House the ability to do so at the end of February, and I agree that nobody wants to see any unnecessary delays.
I thank my friend for that, for those remarks and the spirit with which she's made them. And quite clearly, her amendment does have the effect of ruling out no deal on the 29th of March, and that surely is something that should be good and important to this House, because it will not be any comfort after the 29th of March to say, I told you so, when the lorries are backing up on the M20, when cancer patients can't get medicines, and when prices are rising in our shops. So tonight, Mr. Speaker, we have the opportunity to take no deal off the table. And, Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister invited party leaders for talks, I said to the Prime Minister she must first remove the threat of no deal. If the House today votes to remove the immediate threat of crashing out without a deal on the 29th of March, as I fervently hope it does and will, then I will be happy to meet the Prime Minister to discuss a sensible solution that works for the whole country, which is what the Labour Party wants to achieve. Many of the amendments tabled, Mr. Speaker, including those in the names of my friends, the member for Leeds West and for Birmingham Erdington, and the member for Meriden, advocate delaying Article 50 to give Parliament more time to break the impasse and avoid the dangers of no deal. If this House votes for any of those amendments, then the Prime Minister must accept that an extension to Article 50 is a responsible measure to allow time for real renegotiation and find a deal that can win the support of this House. It will mean no deal is off the table, and it will mean the red lines must change. The primary part, I'm making progress if I may, the primary part of Labour's amendment tonight is about finding a workable solution. That means a new customs union. It means a strong single market deal. And it means, Mr. Speaker, no race to the bottom. No race to the bottom on workers' rights, on environmental protections and standards, or on consumer standards. The EU chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has been clear, and I quote, unanimously, the European Council have always said that if the UK chooses to shift its red lines in the future and go beyond a simple free trade agreement, then the EU will be immediately ready to give a favourable response. And we understand that just this weekend, the EU Commission President told the Prime Minister that accepting the case for a permanent customs union would help to solve the issue of the backstop arrangement. Indeed, Ireland's Europe Minister made exactly this point at the weekend, saying that the backstop is there because of the red lines put down by the UK at the beginning of this process. Today, Mr. Speaker, we understand the Government is backing the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Altrincham and Sale West. The Prime Minister said as much, requiring changes to the backstop. But still, we have no clarity on what changes they are or which red lines will change to allow that to happen. On the other side, we see that there is flexibility and apparent willingness now to renegotiate, but only if the red lines change.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way on that point, and does he share my puzzlement after listening to the Prime Minister for well close to an hour, and after many people ask this question, that we are still no nearer any detail on what the phrase alternative arrangements means, except that the Prime Minister said they were arrangements that were alternative.
I thank my friend for that intervention. In reality, Mr. Speaker, we're witnessing this long, slow decline of this government as they run down the clock on this. They put off the vote. They lost the vote. They came today and are now offering more votes next week, week later, running down the clock of the fear of no deal as opposed to her deal. So when her deal was defeated 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister is still to answer the question as to which of her red lines she's prepared to change or even just be flexible on. So it is clear, Mr. Speaker, the obstacle to a solution is the Prime Minister. She's refusing to accept the clearly stated will of this House, which has decisively, in parliamentary record vote numbers, defeated her deal, and is equally clear in its opposition to a disastrous no deal, which I hope and expect will be reiterated tonight. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to make progress. Mr. Speaker, in the absence of any leadership from the Prime Minister, then solutions are being put forward across this House. There are those advocating Norway Plus or a Common Market 2.0 have worked on a cross-party basis, and I pay tribute to the members for Grantham and Stamford, Harlow, Aberavon and Manchester Central. They are clear that not only do we need full access to the single market, but a customs union too. That is why a new, comprehensive and permanent customs union has long been Labour's policy. It is a pragmatic solution that helps to deliver the Brexit that people voted for, to deliver the frictionless trade that the Prime Minister once promised, that helps to deliver a solution to the Irish backstop, and that helps to deliver a majority across the House for a deal. So far, the Prime Minister has, Mr. Speaker, only doubled down on her own defeated deal, saying last week at Prime Minister's question time that her deal delivers, and I quote, the benefit of customs union and the benefits of our own trade policy. It does no such thing. The political declaration fails to deliver on the Chequers' promise of frictionless trade. It does not even guarantee tariff-free trade. It means we lose 40 to 50 trade agreements we have through the EU. Yes?
Can I ask the right honourable gentleman, why is he scared to take an intervention from the member for Penistone and Stockbridge, a member of the Labour Party for 37 years?
I thank the Minister for his intervention and his brief statement of his leadership intentions. So, as I was saying, Mr. Speaker, I'm making progress.
Order. Is the right honourable gentleman giving way?
Yes.
So he's not giving way. No. Order. The House must behave with decorum. Senior members of the front bench, who I know would proclaim their commitment to, and I'm sure genuinely believe in courtesy in the chamber, are witness to deliberate attempts to shout the Leader of the Opposition down. Order! It will not happen. Order! The rules of this House are clear. If the Leader of the Opposition wishes to give way, he does so. If he doesn't wish to do so, he doesn't have to do so. He will not be shouted down, and no amount of inspired and orchestrated attempt to shout him down will work. Not today, not tomorrow, not at any time. Drop it. It isn't worth it. And actually, you're not very good at it. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm making progress, Mr. Speaker.
Field.
Mr. Speaker, there may be quite a few people in the country watching this debate. They won't understand that our shouting is one way of seeing whether somebody can maintain a line of argument to his and her colleagues here. Given the damage this debate is already doing to our standing with the nation, might not he consider taking all the amendments he didn't call, closing the proceedings early so we could actually give votes which the country will understand, whereas they don't understand this behaviour?
Well, I'm very grateful to the right honourable gentleman. I know he's well-intentioned, but the short answer is no. The timescale for the debate has been set and agreed by the House. The selection by the Chair has been appropriately made in accordance with the conventions of this House and without demur from colleagues, and it is best that we proceed. Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Mr. Speaker, I'm coming towards the end of my remarks because I want to ensure that other members get a chance to speak in this debate.
Simon Hoare, we'll see. A point of order or a real point of order, but we'll see. Mr. Simon Hoare.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful. You've rightly referred earlier in this debate to the expectations in this place of respect and politeness to colleagues. That is a perfectly sensible benchmark to set. In your judgment, sir, and I seek your ruling on this, has the behaviour of the Leader of the Opposition to his honourable friend lived up to your expectations of respect with colleagues?
The answer is very simple. Good order has been preserved, nothing disorderly has taken place, and I don't want to be unkind to the honourable gentleman because I know he's trying to be an apprentice parliamentary expert, but he's got quite a few steps on the ladder still to climb, I'm afraid. Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The point I was making that this could mean we lose 40 to 50 trade agreements we have through the European Union and to which the International Trade Secretary has so far failed to replicate at all, despite the extraordinary and very bold claims he made at the beginning of this whole Brexit process. Mr. Speaker, this is a government in denial, split from top to bottom and incapable of uniting themselves, let alone the country. No, I'm making progress. I'm not going to give way anymore. They are in denial. Mr. Speaker, they are in denial about the majority view of this House that I believe exists to rule out no deal and to get a workable deal that includes a customs union. That's why Labour will tonight back amendments that give this House the opportunity to recognise the reality that this government has so far failed to do. This government's shambolic handling of Brexit negotiations is fast becoming a crisis. It's worrying to businesses. It's worrying to people in work about their own future. And everyone who is worried because they have no leadership on this process from their government. No leadership from a government that has demonstrated it has no ability to negotiate a good deal, no willingness to listen to Parliament, hence we're back here again despite the biggest ever defeat in parliamentary history, and crucially, Mr. Speaker, no acceptance that they must change course. They spent most of the last 2 years arguing amongst themselves rather than negotiating with the European Union. And still, Mr. Speaker, they're arguing amongst themselves and failing to come up with a workable solution. Tonight, Mr. Speaker, I hope this House does its job and leads where this government has failed.
You missed Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think none of us taking part in this debate are in any doubt that we are actually discussing an almost unique political crisis, one of a kind that hasn't happened for very many years. And I think the crisis takes two forms. One is we're trying to break a deadlock, political deadlock, over exactly what changes we're going to make to really the great bulk of our political, security, intelligence, crime fighting, trade and investment, environmental relationships with the rest of the world, having turned away from the ones that we put together for the last 47 years. The other thing is that we are also facing a rather constitutional crisis about the credibility of government and Parliament in its ability to resolve these matters. I rather agree with the honourable member for Birkenhead. I mean, I enjoy as much as any veteran parliamentarian the rowdiness of the House of Commons. It is a way of testing the arguments. But I think we ought to be aware that the public at the moment are looking upon our political system with something rather near to contempt, as it seems to them that neither the government nor the political parties nor parliamentarians and politicians in general seem able to resolve the resolution of a question first raised by a referendum, and referendums are designed by those who support them to bypass parliamentary decision-making and parliamentary majorities and political parties deciding things. And we really do need to settle down, perhaps, if the government gets its way, in the next few weeks, less than 60 days, in deciding how we're going to come to conclusions about the way forward. Now, I want to concentrate, because most of my views on these amendments I've put forward in the many debates we've had already, and many other people want to speak. So I suspect a high proportion of the House could guess which way I'm going to vote on the amendments that the Speaker has chosen, and probably far too many have had to listen to my arguments as to why that went. I'll touch on the end. But just to take some encouragement from this debate, I will in a second, I wish to take up this question of the relationship between Parliament and government, because I did take some encouragement from my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, who did seem to be accepting that the government should give opportunities for the House to debate matters which it regards as key matters of policy, and the government has got to pay regard under our Constitution to the views actually expressed by this House.
Very grateful to the learned and honourable gentleman. He and I have an amendment down which was not called, which was to give this House the chance to vote on the various options. The Prime Minister, when she was speaking, talked of taking other amendments away and working on them with the hope of bringing them back to act upon. Might I, through this intervention, ask him to push on his own side that she does precisely that with our amendment?
Well, lest I take too long, I hope to touch on the arguments behind the honourable gentleman's excellent amendment, because I think that's one of the things we should do in one way or another over the next few weeks. But let me just deal with this question. I'll give way then, if it's relevant, on what is the role of this House vis-à-vis the government, and what are our procedures? Because I have to admit, in the last month or two, I have listened to what I, as a fairly experienced member here now, have regarded as the most extraordinary nonsense about sweeping away centuries of tradition and distorting our procedures because people have objected to the Speaker selecting votes which they think they might not be on the winning side of. And I think there is a rather fundamental underlying problem here. This government didn't start it, but Brexit brought to its head. I think it started with the Blair government, because Tony Blair, with the greatest respect, never could quite understand why he had to submit to Parliament so often, and he started timetabling all our business and so on, but that's the last under the water under the bridge. But I think mistakenly, with respect, this government began by saying of the whole process it was going to invoke the royal prerogative And as it was a treaty, Parliament wouldn't actually be involved in invoking Article 50 or any of the consequences, because the government was going to act, the monarch would act solely on the advice of her Prime Minister, trying to take us back several hundred years, I think. That was swept away. Then we had to have defeats inflicted on the government last summer in order to get a meaningful vote on the outcome at all of any negotiations. And this has gone on all the way through today's debate. And the votes we're having today are only taking place because the government actually resisted the whole idea of coming back here with any alternative to the deal that they were telling us was done and fixed and was the only way of going forward. That has worried me all the way through. Now, I did take the Prime Minister today to be taking a totally different approach, and I hope she will confirm that. It does now seem that whatever course we decide on today, things are going to come back to this House. No deal of any kind is going to be ratified until we've had a vote in this House approving whatever we're presented with, and then it's ratified. And if this House expresses a clear wish, and one problem is we haven't yet produced a consensus or majority about the nature of the deal that it wants to see negotiated, then the government will consider, indeed, I believe, under our constitution, it is bound to follow the wishes of the House of Commons, because it cannot pursue. British governments have never been able to pursue these matters without the consent and support of a majority of the House of Commons.
Very grateful to the learned gentleman for giving way. And he said the House must be testing the various options. Would he join the queue, as it were, an amendment queue which wants to revoke Article 50? Does he think that's one of the amendments and one of the ideas that should be tested in this House? I mean, for nothing else, the people of Scotland will at least know the folly of sticking with Westminster, taking them out of Europe against their will.
I don't wish to revoke Article 50 for the same reasons as the honourable gentleman. I mean, I share his views on the. I mean, if I was left if I was trying to exercise unfettered autocratic power in the government of the country, I of course believe still that the best interests of the United Kingdom lie in remaining members of the European Union. I don't share the enthusiasm, however, for what the honourable gentleman wants, which is that we, after the pleasure of the first referendum and all that it's caused, that we now think we'll automatically resolve things by having a second referendum, which could be even more chaotic in its effects than the one we have had. But I say, I've just made my point that I do think that the government of the day has got to give a far bigger role to this House, which which means a much bigger responsibility on this House to create the intra-party, cross-party majority, which I believe is the only majority of any kind that might be available here for any sensible way of going forward. All the arguments, just finish the point, and then I'll give you, wait a minute. I mean, I heard all this stuff which, when the clerks were invoked, to the advice of the clerks to resist this approach to government. Of course it's true that the law can only be changed by legislation. That's a perfectly straightforward legal point. But in our constitution, in my opinion, the government is accountable politically to the non-legislative votes of Parliament. It is utterly absurd to say that opposition supply days, amendments to motions of the kind we're addressing today, are just the resolutions of a debating society, which have no effect upon the conduct of daily government. if we concede that point in the middle of this shambles of Brexit, with all the other things that we have to resolve, we'll have done great harm to future generations, because it's difficult to see how the concept of parliamentary sovereignty is actually going to survive such an extraordinary definition. Now, we'll give way.
I'm very grateful to the right honourable and learned gentleman. Can I humbly suggest that the Prime Minister is actually following the will of Parliament, because she's remembering that 2 years ago, 2/3 of MPs in this current Parliament voted to trigger Article 50, which leads to the unconditional leaving of the European Union on the 29th of March. That's the instruction she was given by Parliament that she is trying to deliver, and our duty is to assist her.
Well, with the greatest respect to my honourable friend, I think that my approach throughout the last 2 years has demonstrated that I am prepared to be pragmatic in response to these things. I didn't regard myself as bound by a referendum. In the British Constitution, referendums are advisory. They're described as such in official pronunciations, but politically, most of this House bound themselves to obeying the result. That was brought home to me in a parliamentary way, consistent with what I've just been saying, by the massive majority that was cast for invoking Article 50. I opposed the invocation of Article 50, but since that time, I have to accept, this House has willed that we're leaving the European Union. I don't agree, with respect to my honourable friend, that we agreed that we left unconditionally, whatever the circumstances, at a then arbitrary date, 2 years ahead, when we wasted, in my opinion, at least the first 18 months of the time, because nobody here had really thought through in any detailed way what exactly we were now going to seek as an alternative to our membership to the European Union, to safeguard our political and economic relationships with the world in future. And we still haven't decided that. So, as Ian, I looked as though I'm going to be remarkably brief by my own standards, but probably only in contrast with the frequent interrupted speeches from the front bench, which I've been mercifully, only mildly and perfectly pleasantly exposed to. Let me just therefore say, where does that leave me to believe I have a duty to make my mind up on the votes we're going to have today? Because I am one of those. I voted for withdrawal on the withdrawal agreement. That was, in my lifetime, the first time I've ever cast any kind of vote contemplating Britain leaving the European project and leaving the European Union. The agreement, I thought, was perfectly harmless, perfectly obvious, could have been negotiated years before. Citizenship rights, legally owed debts that obviously we're going to honour, and also an arrangement that protected the Irish border, our treaty commitment to a permanently open border. The independent lady who sits for a constituency, I can't remember, so Lady Howard, I think she's the only Irish member we have who agrees with the majority of the Irish population that they will prefer to remain as an outcome of this. But she, like me, I think, accepts reality. But I know she thinks the backstop is an important defence of the interests of Ireland in an open border. And I think it is quite absurd to reopen that. The Prime Minister is still committed, I'm glad to say, I congratulate her, very firmly to a permanent open border. The Prime Minister is not going to break our solemn treaty commitments and set back our relationships with the Republic of Ireland for another generation by doing so. I personally can't see, and I realise the Prime Minister has been driven to it by the attitudes of quite a number of people on this side of the House, what is this vague alternative to a perfectly harmless backstop that we're now going to explore? Nor do I see what the outcome is going to be if our partners or our previous partners in the European Union can't understand quite what it is we're arguing for either. So we move from having a deal to not having a deal. And let me just say what I will vote for. I'm not going to go through amendment by amendment because members are waiting who are going to move these amendments. I shall vote for anything that avoids leaving with no deal on the 29th of March. It's perfectly obvious that we're in a state of such chaos that we're not remotely going to answer these questions in the next 60 or less than 60 days before we need more time. The Prime Minister says, oh, there are only two alternatives. There's the deal we've got, which she's now wanting to alter and go back and reopen again, or no deal on the 29th of March. That's not true. A further alternative, and my guess is that the other members of the European Union would only be too ready to hear us open this possibility, is we extend Article 50 to give us time to actually reach some consensus. I think it would require quite a time. There are problems over the European Parliament and so on. I have always said, well, we can revoke, making clear to the angry majority in the House of Commons that they can invoke it again with their majority once we're in a position to actually settle these outstanding issues, which, as we sit here at the moment, we're nowhere near resolving, and we're right at the end of the timetable. So I think the alternative is, if the no deal, is to stay in the Union for as long as it takes to get near to a deal that we're likely all to be able to agree on, and the majority of us think is in the national interest, probably for the last time, to my right honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. He will be joining me in the lobbies, I think, therefore, in support of what is known as the Cooper Amendment. Would you agree with me that in changing standing orders, the House of Commons, if it has a majority to do so, is doing something which the House of Commons has done since standing orders were created, and before, in 1906, the government took control of the order paper?
Absolutely. We won't debate the constitutional history, but people are trying to invoke the strictest interpretation of standing orders, going back to attempts in the late 19th century to stop the Irish nationalist filibustering, which did bring the whole thing grinding to a halt. And now we're saying, as this Parliament has the temerity to have a range of views, some of which are not acceptable to the government, standing orders should be invoked against us to discipline us and make sure we don't. Anyway, I won't go back on that, but I agree with that. The other thing I shall vote for is anything which supports, again, the Prime Minister's stated ambition for the long-term future of the country: open borders, free trade between ourselves and our markets in the EU, as demanded by our business leaders, our trade union leaders, and I think most people who have the economic well-being of future generations at heart. The only way I think known in the world in which you can do that is you stay in a customs union, and then you have sufficient regulatory alignment to eliminate the need for the border barriers. Now, I don't mind if some of my right honourable and honourable friends prefer to call the customs union a customs arrangement. I don't mind if they care to call a single market regulatory alignment. That's perfectly, don't feel any great distress at the use of gentler language to describe these things. Something very near that is required to deliver our economic, our political ambitions, and actually, again, it's the obvious and only way to protect the permanent open border in Ireland and this ridiculous Irish backstop. You don't need it. You don't need to invent it if the whole United Kingdom is going into a situation where it has an open border with the whole of the European Union. In any event, the Irish backstop was only invented to appease those people who envisaged the rest of the British Isles suddenly deciding to leave with no deal before we'd finished the negotiations in Europe. Well, let's forget that. Let's make our aim, and I think it'll be not easy, perfectly possible to negotiate, probably successfully, with the other 27, open trading, economic investment relationship through the single market and the customs union. I will make my last one too.
Thank you.
Mr. Speaker. I'm very grateful indeed to the Father of the House for allowing me to intervene. Just to say ever so gently that in his very nice tribute to the Honourable Member for North Down, I think he might have accidentally referred to the lady as an Irish member of this House. No, I'm very much a British member of this House. However, the Father of the House is absolutely right. I feel passionately about protecting the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement, and the peace that it has delivered in the last 20 years across Northern Ireland and across the whole of the United Kingdom. And the backstop was there to protect that peace. And I'm very sorry that, in fact, the Prime Minister has moved away with that today.
Well, I apologise to the Honourable Lady, but I must explain to her, I referred to her and her colleagues as an Irish Member of Parliament in the same way I would refer to myself as an English Member of Parliament, or perhaps a colleague as a Welsh or a Scottish Member of Parliament. She's Northern Irish. I can assure you that not only do I agree entirely with the views she's just expressed about what we're seeking here, but I'm as keen a unionist as she is, and I do not wish to see the break-up of the present United Kingdom. So, subject to that, I think she and I are in total agreement. My last point, the other thing I would support has been noted several times already. It arises in the context of the amendment we were talking about. The government obviously should no longer resist this House having indicative votes. It is absurd that some of the more obvious things we've been trying to get a debate and a vote on for months now, and as time goes on, the government's still trying to make it difficult to have a vote on them. And then when we have them, no doubt the government and the front bench will start imposing three-line whips on everybody to take a particular narrow focus to try to take us all back towards the failed withdrawal agreement or the rather confused front bench policy of the Labour Party in making sure we shoot down every other sensible proposition. I think there are quite a lot of sensible propositions flying around the House, superior both to the policy of the government so far and certainly superior to the policy of the Leader of the Opposition. But the indicative votes, so that in the time available, to shorten the delay further, we actually get an expression of will, an instruction to the government about the nature of the long-term arrangement we want, is what we want. Going back to where I started, if we are to strive to restore confidence in our political system, our political institutions, above all this House of Commons, I think the circumstances of the moment mean that we have got to do that and make sure an outcome of that kind emerges. Because if this shambles goes on much longer, I hate to think where populism and extremism will take us next in British democracy.
Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As always, it's a pleasure to follow the right honourable gentleman from Rushcliffe, and I look forward to spending a considerable amount of time with him in the lobbies this evening as we vote for what I think will be amendments that offer hope to the people of all these islands. Mr. Speaker, I want to impress upon the Prime Minister the decision of the people of Scotland in the 2016 referendum and what she must now do to respect their wishes. In 2014, the Scottish Tory leader, Ruth Davidson, during the Scottish independence referendum, promised that voting no meant that Scotland remained in the EU. But Scotland didn't vote for a Tory Brexit, and we're being dragged out of the European Union by Westminster against our will. And yet the Prime Minister talks about this being a family of nations and Scotland's voice would be respected. Where is the respect for the views and the wishes of the people of Scotland that have demonstrably said that they wish to remain as EU citizens? I'll give way on that.
I'm grateful, the right honourable gentleman, for giving way. Isn't it, in fact, a reality that in polling in Scotland, the European Union remains more popular with the Scottish people than the United Kingdom? And that is something that should be heard loud and clear in this place. The European Union is more popular with Scots than the United Kingdom.
Well, indeed, that is correct, and of course it's little surprise because the European institutions show respect to the people of Scotland, something this government doesn't. Mr. Speaker, The Prime Minister promised a no vote would see Scotland's future as an equal partner. Now, what do we see? Westminster now taking powers off the Scottish Parliament against the wishes of the Scottish Parliament and against the wishes of the Scottish people. You know, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it because I hear from a sedentary position the member for Stirling saying, what powers? Now, obviously, he has forgotten that he voted through the Withdrawal Act that interfered with the powers of the Scottish Parliament that were laid down in the Scotland Act. Powers over fishing, powers over the environment, powers over agriculture, and the Tories sat back and allowed the Scottish Parliament to be emasculated. And the 13 Scottish Tories acted against the interests of the people of Scotland as they've done time and time again. Mr. Speaker, the Westminster campaign against Scottish independence said that high street banks were making plans to leave Scotland. Yet now, because of this government's Brexit, Standard Life Aberdeen is setting up a hub in Dublin, and Lloyds Bank is looking at a Berlin base.
Independent Ireland.
And even last week, during Prime Minister's questions, the Prime Minister tried to tell me to drop the SNP policy of independence. But yet, Mr. Speaker, in June 2017, the leader of the Scottish Tories, Ruth Davidson, said, "Let me be clear, nobody, not me, not anyone, is expecting the SNP to give up on independence. That's what it believes in, and it's a perfectly honourable position to take." Mr. Speaker, a perfectly honourable position to take. Let me be very clear. Scotland must no longer be left at the mercy of events. Whatever happens here, the SNP will not be dropping its policy of independence. And whatever turmoil and hardship this Tory government tries to drag our nation through, Scotland will and must have the right to determine its own future. Mr. Speaker, to choose to be an independent nation within the European Union. Now, I can see members shaking their heads, because they're running scared. Like the Prime Minister, they fear they would lose an independence referendum. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Scottish people are sick and tired of being told that what the Prime Minister wants them to do. Scotland needs are much more important than what the Prime Minister wants. Scotland needs the power to take its own decisions. That's the only way we can stop the Tories driving us off the cliff edge and into disaster. How happily give way.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He made the point that the Scottish people should have what the Scottish people want. Did the Scottish people indicate their want to remain a part of the United Kingdom?
I can only assume that the honourable lady wasn't listening to what I said in my remarks, because the fundamental fact is that we were promised that we would stay in the European Union. And what the Tories find it very difficult to accept, that when the Scottish National Party went to the people of Scotland in 2016, in our manifesto, we asked for the right to go back to the people of Scotland if there was a material change of circumstances. And, Mr. Speaker, that's exactly the position that we're in today. There is a majority in the Scottish Parliament for a referendum on Scottish independence. And yet what we hear from the Conservatives is now is not the time, disrespecting the mandate that the people of Scotland gave to its elected parliamentarians. And I'll say this to the Conservative benches. If our First Minister calls for a Section 30 authority based on democracy, then this House must respect the will of the Scottish people to its elected parliamentarians.
EU shows respect.
Mr. Speaker, the only way to stop the punitive cuts from universal credit and end the hostile environment that sends talented workers away from our shores. The vote on the immigration bill is just the latest indication of Westminster voting against Scotland's national interest. We embrace free movement of people. We welcome those that choose to make a future for themselves in Scotland. We thank those who wish to add to our cultural diversity. This place wants to slam the door shut and pull up the drawbridge, to retreat into isolation. And we watch the official opposition go through trials and tribulations as to whether it should be opposing a narrow-minded immigration policy from this government. Mr Speaker, Labour has lost its moral compass. Then we have the Scots Tory MPs meekly going through the lobbies. Theresa's lobby for the supporting legislation that will damage Scottish industries and our public services, damaging Scotland's ability to attract labour and to grow our economy. The Scottish Tories acting against our national interest, Labour stuck on the sidelines. Mr Speaker, a majority of MSPs and Scottish MPs returned at the last two elections support holding an independence referendum in the circumstances we now found ourselves. Scotland will not be ignored. The UK Government has ignored the views of the people of Scotland. Our Parliament, our Scottish Parliament, has already overwhelmingly rejected the Prime Minister's deal. Today, Mr Speaker, SNP MPs will vote in support of that mandate from Scotland's Parliament, and we will continue to vote down the blindfold Brexit deal that will drive our economy off the cliff edge. Mr Speaker, there is just 59 days to go until Brexit Day, and that deal on the table is done. It's been dead in the water now for months, yet the Prime Minister is still seeking to run down the clock and push it through this House. This is incredibly reckless and risky. How can the Prime Minister be allowed to behave in such a manner?
Quite right.
The Prime Minister has no hope of being able to control this House. She cannot even control her own disunited party.
Correct.
And for anyone who may still have been in any doubt, we're hearing this mess today because the party on these benches gambled on our economic future over a decade-long internal feud in the Tory party. They should all hang their heads in shame. Quite simply, the party opposite is not fit to govern because it has a track record of putting its fractured party interest before all our national interests. Not what the Prime Minister calls the national interest, but the interest of all the nations that make up the UK. I'll give way. Is there any water?
Thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. On the matter of national interest, if we talk about Scottish national interest for a second, I totally respect the SNP's position to always want to campaign for independence, because that is what the SNP does. But would the right honourable gentleman also agree that in 2017, in the general election in 2017, the majority of voters in Scotland, 56% of voters in Scotland voted for parties that were committed to delivering on Brexit, and the percentage of vote for parties against Brexit actually reduced?
Order! Extraordinary behaviour by the Honourable Lady, who's a very illustrious doctor. I can't believe that she rants from a sedentary position in the middle of her surgeries in that way. It's unbecoming of somebody of her status and high esteem in the House of Commons. Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Of course, we come to this place under the rules which are laid down for us. And by the rules of elections in this country, the SNP won 35 of the 59 seats for Westminster. There is a majority for the Scottish National Party in this Parliament. The Conservatives could only dream of having a majority. You know, a Prime Minister that went to the country on the basis that she was going to come back with an overwhelming majority. She came back with a bloody nose and a minority administration, relying on the votes of the DUP, where they're handing over vast sums of money in order to keep themselves in any kind of power. Mr Speaker, today the Prime Minister faces a vote on her motion, with the threat of resignations overshadowing the debate. We know that senior ministers have refused to rule out resigning if no deal is not taken off the table. And, Mr Speaker, we know that politicians play a slow game. Time is actually running out for businesses. The Honourable Member for Luton, the Business Minister, has said that the Prime Minister's attempt to put pressure on moderate MPs to back her deal to avoid a disorderly Brexit was a disaster for business. The Chief Executive of Airbus, Tom Enders, said that business could be forced to redirect future investments in the event of a no deal. And the Chief Executive of Siemens, Jürgen Meyer, said that the thing all of us won't be able to manage is no deal. And now we hear from the British Retail Consortium warning of food shortages, warning of empty shelves. Just dwell on this. Sainsbury's, Asda, Marks and Spencer, the Co-op, Waitrose, Cost Cutter, all warning of not being able to have sufficient supplies, of shelves lying empty. Mr. Speaker, we are used to seeing images of empty shelves in war-torn or failing states. There is now a real threat of empty shelves happening in the United Kingdom in less than 2 months. Still, the Prime Minister refuses to take no deal off the table, and I point the finger of blame at the Prime Minister and her government. The primary responsibility of any government is to protect its citizens. We have a massive failure of leadership. Food shortages and shortages of medicine that would be a response to the failure of this government if they were to happen. There is genuine and heartfelt fear and alarm from some of our biggest businesses.
Can I just ask him what would be his objection to giving the Prime Minister the ability to do what is in effect a probing amendment with the EU, to see what they're prepared to give way, to help deliver the deal that he would like to see happen? What would be his objection? What is so objectionable in this new Amendment N? Can he give any reason for not supporting it?
Mr. Speaker, this is a complete fantasy, and all of us play with the Good Friday Agreement at our peril. The peace in Ireland has been hard won, and the European Union has reached agreement with the UK on the Prime Minister's draft deal on the basis of making sure that we enshrine the Good Friday Agreement. None of us should be playing with fire and seeking to unwind the Good Friday Agreement, because that's the effect of what would happen. It is the height of irresponsibility to go down that road. I'm going to come on to the backstop in more detail later on, and I will cover it. The Prime Minister could make it clear today that she will bring measures in front of Parliament to rule out no deal. Prime Minister, that is in all our national interest. Remove the threat of supply shortages. There is a threat to food safety. Remove it today.
On that point, I'm grateful for my right honourable friend for giving way. Isn't it also a fact, in addition to all of those companies who've issued these warnings, that the Road Haulage Association have been saying for over a year that this is madness to actually look at a no-deal situation, and that actually what will happen is that those people at the furthest reaches of the supply chain, my constituents, his constituents, will be those who are worst affected by this no-deal scenario that the government are hanging over the heads of this Parliament and the people of all the nations of the UK.
My honourable friend is quite correct. We have integrated supply chains on the basis of the single market, which has been in place since the 1990s, and there are very real and very real threats that exist to food supply on the basis of no deal. It is a height of irresponsibility for the government not to rule that out. I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful to him for giving way, because he's making a really powerful case about what no deal could really look like. And amongst that, he said that there could be food shortages and, crucially, that food prices could go up. Does he share my anger, really, with the voices behind me that he perhaps didn't hear? But when he was talking about food prices going up and the fact there could be food shortages, the people behind me were saying, well, let them go to the chippy instead. No. Does he share my anger about the way in which our constituencies would be affected by a no deal?
I'm sorry to hear that that was a remark that was made. And, you know, this is a really important debate, and I think there's a responsibility that we take these issues seriously, each and every one of us. Mr. Speaker, I want to make some progress, and I will take some interventions later on. The Prime Minister will do nothing. She remains in office, but not in power. Transfixed like a rabbit caught in the headlights. A failure to deliver leadership. To use a food analogy, the Prime Minister is past her sell-by date. Focused on backing MPs into a corner with options only of her deal or no deal on the table is ridiculous, and I urge members to resist the pressure. We cannot allow the UK government to run down the clock and bully MPs into backing this terrible deal. Pretending there is a binary choice between her woeful deal and a catastrophic no deal is completely reckless. Mr Speaker, it is false. It is not the case, and members must have the courage to stand up against that. We have the power in this place to send this shambolic deal packing. We have the power to amend this deal to protect all our citizens. We have the power to end this charade. So members on all benches, have courage, have conviction and have some integrity. Do not send our economy off the cliff edge with this deal or with no deal.
I'm grateful he's given way. He's made some very powerful points, quoting the voices of business, saying that there should be no deal. And I also believe there should be no deal, and I believe there should be a deal. But does he also accept that those same voices of business, giving evidence to select committees of this House, have said, for the very reasons he's giving that there should be no deal, that we should be supporting the Prime Minister's deal with the European Union because it provides for an orderly and smooth Brexit?
I'm afraid from the businesses that I speak to, they recognise the benefits of the single market and the customs union.
Yes,
there is no Brexit option which is going to leave us better off than the status quo. And I'm going to come on to the economic arguments about this, because the job of all of us is to protect the economic interests of our citizens. And Brexit is going to lead to a situation where there are going to be job losses throughout the United Kingdom. We've already seen the news from the European Medicines Agency, from the European Banking Authority. They've gone. We've seen the news from Jaguar Land Rover and others. And it is the height of irresponsibility of politicians on the basis of ideology to threaten the economic circumstances of their citizens. Because that is what is happening, because of the Tory party myopic view of Brexit and leading all these nations out of the European Union. I'll take one last intervention, then I must move on.
Gentleman for giving way, but may I gently say to him, we will soon have only 3 hours left of debate, and there are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 amendments, and many backbenchers, I'm not one of them, who wish to make a speech. And I will tell him I look forward to joining him in the lobbies this evening on many of these amendments, and many of us are grateful for his support.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for her intervention. I have to suggest to her that it is the Prime Minister that sets the timeline for this debate. And what I'm doing is I'm speaking as the leader of the third party, as I'm entitled to do so. And I might ask the question, since it's been raised, as where is the Prime Minister and where is the leader of the opposition? One last time, and then I must make progress.
I thank him for giving way. Going back to the intervention from Ron Wentworth for Stirling, is it not insane to talk about an orderly Brexit by agreeing to the Prime Minister's so-called deal? Because all it does is put stuff into a transition period for so that period of time where we don't know what's happening. And even the Prime Minister is now arguing she needs to go back and change the backstop. So there is no orderly Brexit and there is no deal to actually agree.
Indeed, and of course, the government likes to talk about an implementation period. And of course, you have to beg the question, what are we implementing? Because the only thing the government's come forward with is a deal to leave the European Union. And the future relationship between the United Kingdom and the European Union is to be left to the future, and there's no knowing how long that will take. There's supposedly, according to the papers in front of us, a 2-year period, but many believe that it could take 5 years, perhaps even longer than that. There is no certainty with what this government is bringing forward. Mr. Speaker, we have still not seen any economic assessment of the government's deal. Either the Prime Minister hasn't instructed her government to conduct one, or the reality of the hardship of her deal will bring is why the government will not publish it. Mr. Speaker, we are being asked here again to vote for a blindfold Brexit, to sleepwalk into the future, without the facts and analysis from this government of what the deal means for our economy. In fact, it is an insult to this House and each and every member in it. I say to the Prime Minister, and I hope she reads about it in Hansard since she's not here, that will she publish the details of the impact of her deal on the economy and contrast it with the status quo. Mr. Speaker, if the government refused to end their shroud of secrecy and publish an economic analysis, let me remind the House of the facts. Analysis by Scottish Government officials found that by 2030, under a free trade agreement, GDP would be £9 billion lower than if we stayed in the EU, equivalent to a cost of £1,600 per person in Scotland. The Bank of England has warned that crashing out of the EU without a deal would be worse than the 2008 financial crisis.
Absolutely right.
With house prices plummeting by as much as 30%, with the Bank of England rate hiking to 4%. Brexit uncertainty is already damaging our economy
Absolutely right.
to the tune of £600 per household per year. Jobs are at risk. Investment is at risk. Our economy is set to be weaker and smaller. Mr. Speaker, how can any members in this House countenance that? We have been elected to protect our citizens and punish them. Brexit will inflict undue pain across all parts of the United Kingdom. With this deal or no deal, our constituents are set to suffer. We cannot allow that to happen. Brexiteers argue that we will be okay without the internal markets of the EU. Some Brexiteers are in cloud cuckoo land, harping back to the past. Well, I say to them, it's over. Let's look at the facts. The UK's trade with County Cork is worth almost as much as its entire trade with South Africa.
Wow.
Trade with Ireland is worth more to the UK than trade with India, Japan, New Zealand and Australia put together. And as Scotland's place in Europe demonstrated, even if the UK signed agreements with the 10 biggest non-EEA single-country trading partners, including the USA, China and Canada, a process that would take many years, this would only cover 37% of Scotland's current exports compared to 43% that go to the EU. The idea that we will be better off outside the European Union is a fallacy.
I thank the right member for giving way. If trade volumes are the principal determinant of policy in this area, wouldn't he agree that given 61% of Scotland's exports comes to the rest of the UK and only 17% to the European Union, the most important union for Scotland is the United Kingdom?
Well, I have to say, Mr. Speaker, I find that remarkable. There we have a threat to the people of Scotland from one of the Conservatives in this House. I thought that we believed in free trade. We're not talking about having any barriers with trade with the island of Ireland. Why on earth would there be any barriers to trade with Scotland? And it's about time that the Conservatives stop threatening the people of Scotland, because that's exactly what you're doing. Mr. Speaker, it really is demoralising to stand here today listening to the merry-go-round of Tory infighting and Labour fence-sitting.